The library is dark. One lamp. And her. Empress Celine has run this empire alone for 12 years. She has never been afraid of anything. Tonight, she cannot look at me without showing the things she has been hiding for months, because she knows everything. My real name. My sister's veil. The lie I walked through her doors wearing. She has known since the very first moment, and instead of sending me away, she kept me. Now someone has noticed. The court is watching. And the Empress, who has never chosen anyone, is standing at the edge of choosing me. The question is whether she will survive it. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't announce itself with trembling or tears. It arrives the way fog arrives off the sea quietly, at the edges first, until you realize it has already filled everything, and the fog was never coming from outside but from somewhere beneath your own ribs. I know this kind of fear intimately. I felt it the morning I became my sister. Not in the exact moment the veil was pressed into my hands, not in the first step I took across the threshold into the most powerful room in the empire. I felt it in the moment. The woman on the dais looked at me across 30 feet of white stone, and I understood, from the particular quality of her stillness, that she already knew I was lying. But that comes later. Let me start where all good disasters start. With a sister, a maid, and a decision made in less time than it takes to say a proper prayer, Vivienne left before dawn. 3 sharp knocks broke my sleep apart. Hesta's knock, my sister's maid, not mine. Hesta knocked like that when something had gone catastrophically wrong, and she needed whoever was behind the door to understand the gravity before they even said good morning. I opened the door. She looked at me the way people look when they have discovered that the solution to a catastrophic problem might be standing in front of them in a nightgown. "She's gone," she said. For one suspended and terrible moment, I thought she meant dead. Hesta shook her head quickly. "Not like that." She took the traveling bag from under the floorboard and left a letter that says she is sorry, she will write when she is somewhere safe, and she cannot go to the Empress. She never could. I should have seen it. Hesta pressed her free hand over her mouth and breathed once, long and controlled. "We are ruined. Your father will be stripped of his title." The summons from the imperial court cannot be ignored. To fail to appear is an insult that no noble family in this empire survives with anything intact. "Why are you telling me?" I said, though some quiet, stubborn part of me had already understood. Hesta reached into her apron and produced a veil. Ivory silk, embroidered with the fine silver thread of our family's crest, commissioned 3 weeks ago as part of my sister's court presentation preparations. The imperial summons had specified that the presented lady arrive veiled, a tradition of deference, approaching the throne unseen, waiting for the Empress to grant visibility. "You have her coloring," Hesta said, her height. "You've spent 2 months reading everything she prepared. You know the family protocols, the court histories, one audience. The Empress assigns you a position. You serve as Lady Vivienne Aldenmere, and if my lady ever returns, it can be managed as a clerical confusion. The court does not care about daughters. It cares about family names." I looked at the veil. I looked at my own hands, which were not trembling yet, but were considering it. The truth about why I took it is more complicated than survival. Vivienne went to seasonal courts. Vivienne attended the Empress's processions. Vivienne's letters came home filled with rooms I had never entered and people I had never met. I was not resentful. I was not precisely unhappy. I had a library and a window overlooking the East Garden, and a life that fit me adequately, if not particularly well. But there was something in me, small and stubborn, and unreasonably insistent. Something that wanted, just once, to be in the room, even as someone else, even wearing a name that was not mine. I took the veil. Hesta dressed me in Vivienne's presentation gown, which fit as though it had been made for both of us, and talked me through the court protocols with the speed of someone who has no time for comfort. The correct angle of the bow, the count of 5 before rising. The rule about never addressing the Empress first. The rule about eye contact considered either extreme impertinence or invitation depending on the Empress's temper, and about which, Hesta said grimly, no one had found a reliable predictor. What is she actually like? I asked, as Hesta fastened the final pin. The Empress, beyond the accounts. Hesta was quiet long enough that the silence had its own weight. She is exactly what the accounts say. Brilliant and precise and entirely ungiven to warmth. And underneath all of that, I think there is something she has decided the world is not permitted to reach. I thought about that for the entire carriage ride. Through the gates, taller than any architecture I had ever seen close enough to touch, through the receiving hall with its white stone floor and painted ceiling showing 200 years of imperial lineage, through corridors of such purposeful grandeur that the grandeur itself felt like a message, a constant reminder that everything here was chosen, nothing accidental, and you were already, always, being read. And then the doors to the throne room opened. I have never been a person easily silenced by rooms. Books have given me a working relationship with enormous ideas and vast histories. But the throne room was not large in the way books are large. It was present. It had specific gravity, a weight against the chest the way certain music does when it reaches the part it has been building toward all along. The ceiling arched 3 stories above the white stone floor. Windows ran the eastern wall in long intersecting panels of gold and gray morning light. 30 people in attendance. Court officials, ladies in waiting, guards whose faces had never permitted anything to live in them besides vigilance. And on the dais, Empress Celine. She was younger than the portraits suggested, perhaps 30. Her hair was pale gold, wound in an arrangement both severe and remarkable. No crown, only a circlet so fine it was almost suggestion rather than assertion. Her gown was the deep blue of the imperial standard, and her hands, one resting on the arm of the throne, were the hands of someone accustomed to holding things carefully. She was looking at me, not at the room. At me specifically, from the moment I crossed the threshold, through the 30 feet of white stone, through the veil that was supposed to render me invisible until she chose otherwise. Her expression performed careful neutrality, while something else entirely occurred underneath it. I walked the 18 paces to the marked circle, lowered my chin to my chest in the bow, held it for the count of 5, and rose. Silence. Then Empress Celine said, "Approach." Her voice was the thing no one had found adequate words for, low and controlled, with a quality beneath the control like a bell that has been dampened but not silenced. I walked the 3 additional steps and stopped. "Lady Vivian Aldenmere," she said. "Not a question. A reading of evidence." "Your Imperial Majesty," I said, steadier than I had any right to be. She rose and descended the dais with the unhurried precision of someone for whom movement is always a choice, never a reflex. She came to stand 4 feet from me and looked at the veil with the expression of someone who has already decided what they are going to do. "The Aldenmere family has served this empire across 3 generations," she said. "It would be a disappointment to discover that the finest daughter sent this season was in fact the second one." Everything in my chest went cold. I did not overcorrect. "Your Majesty flatters the Aldenmere family. We send our most capable, regardless of birth order." Something shifted in her expression, in the air between us the way temperature changes near deep water. "I have never found flattery particularly useful," she said. "It tells me only what a speaker wants me to believe. I am far more interested in what people choose to conceal." And then she reached out and took the edge of my veil between 2 fingers and lifted it slowly, with the deliberate care of someone who intends to see what they are looking at. There is no word for what it felt like. Not exposure, though that was part of it. Not vulnerability, though that was also true. It was the specific sensation of being examined by someone who had already decided that whatever they found underneath was worth finding, who reached for the veil, not as formality but as genuine choice. The silk fell back across my shoulders. The cool air of the throne room met my face. I was standing 2 feet from an empress who looked at me in a way that made the 30 assembled members of the court feel very, very far away. Her eyes were gray, The particular gray of a winter sea on a clear morning, deep and not cold in the ways I had been told they would be. They moved across my features with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who reads well and knows that rushing defeats the purpose. "You are frightened," she said. "Yes," I said, because denying it would have been its own form of insult. Most people who stand here are frightened. They manage it with varying degrees of skill. You have not attempted to manage it at all. Your Majesty is said to find concealment more interesting than what's being concealed. It seemed counterproductive to attempt it. The silence that followed lasted long enough that every person in the room held their breath with me. Then Empress Celine said, "You have read my correspondence. What is publicly available regarding your Majesty's philosophy of governance?" She turned back toward the dais with the quality of someone who has decided a conversation should continue somewhere other than where it started. "You will be placed in the Eastern Wing. Lady-in-waiting status begins tomorrow. Chamberlain Voss will deliver your schedule." She paused at the base of the steps without turning. "I expect accuracy in everything you tell me during your time here. I am very poorly suited to tolerating its absence." She returned to the throne. The audience was over. Hesta was waiting in the antechamber, her face the particular shade of someone who has been holding a catastrophe at arm's length through sheer force of will. She pressed a glass of water into my hands. "She lifted the veil herself," I said. Hesta closed her eyes briefly. "That is not standard." She said she knew I was the second daughter. 3 very long seconds passed. "But you were not removed," Hesta said. "No." She knows. And she has decided to let me stay, for reasons I cannot begin to predict. I don't know whether to be reassured or terrified. "Both," Hesta said, with complete practicality. "Definitely both." I stood in the antechamber with the water and tried to locate, somewhere inside the fog of the morning, a version of myself that knew what to do next. There was not one immediately available. What I found instead was the particular stillness that comes after a thing has been decided and cannot be undecided. I had walked into the most powerful room in the empire wearing a name that was not mine. I had been seen through by the most powerful woman in it, and I had not been removed. Whatever came next was simply the consequence of that, and consequences, I had learned, were manageable so long as you kept moving. So, I kept moving. My quarters in the Eastern Wing were 3 rooms, a sitting room, a bedchamber facing the rear garden, and a small study containing a writing desk and a shelf of books selected with enough care to tell you something about whoever had made the selection. History, philosophy. 1 volume of poetry with a spine so worn it had lost its resistance, read and returned and read again by someone who needed it to hold. Cress, my own Maid 17, with the specific compressed competence of someone who has too much intelligence for the task at hand, knocked and came in as I was attempting to unfold a traveling cloak and took it from me in 3 movements. "The palace seems very organized," she said, in the tone she reserved for situations she was quietly assessing. "It is. Then dinner tonight will be instructive. I heard the Empress sometimes observes new arrivals in the main hall and watches more than she speaks. At dinner, the woman who sat beside me between courses did so with the ease of someone who decides where she belongs rather than being assigned there. Lady Drew Vestamere, she said, extending a hand with rings on every finger at the wrong joint, all of them, deliberately, with the cheerful defiance of someone who knows the rules and has decided they are optional. Don't try to memorize the room tonight. It cannot be done, and the effort only broadcasts that you're lost. 4 years here and there are still people at this table I'd have to guess at. Vivienne Aldenmere, I said. I know who you are. Everyone who was in the throne room this morning knows. She poured more wine with the ease of someone who considers it a small personal kindness she owes herself. The Empress lifted your veil. That never happens. She had already found something interesting before she confirmed what you looked like, which means she was paying attention before you arrived. She set her glass down. That is a double-edged circumstance. The things she pays attention to tend to matter to her considerably, which means she will notice everything, including inconsistencies. Especially those, I said. Exactly. One piece of advice that has served me better than anything else in this court. Don't try to be more than you are. This place is full of people performing excellence they've rehearsed. The Empress is bored by performances. She has watched them for 12 years. What she is not bored by is the unexpected true thing. She looked at me with eyes that were clever and kind, in an unusual combination for a court environment. Whatever you brought into that throne room today that was actually yours, hold on to it. I thought about that for the rest of the evening. About what I had that was actually mine. The military history. The way I read rooms instead of people. The 23 years of staying behind while Vivienne went forward. The library. The quiet. The particular quality of attention I gave things because I had always had time to give it, and no one expecting anything else from me. Whether those were assets in a place like this remained to be seen. Lady Drew found me again on the third day, in the south garden where I had gone to escape the particular atmosphere of the outer chambers, 20 people performing competence at each other, all of them highly skilled, none of it relaxing to observe. She fell into step beside me with the ease of someone who has already decided you are worth the detour. "You've been quiet," she said. "I'm always quiet," I said. "No," she said, "you are precise. There is a difference. Quiet people disappear into rooms. Precise people make rooms reorganize themselves without anyone quite understanding how." She glanced at me sideways. "She does the same thing, the Empress. She walks into a room and the room rearranges, not because she demands it, because something in the space recognizes that it should." She paused. "I noticed it the first time I saw the two of you in the same room at the evening briefing. The way the space between you had a different quality than the rest of the space in the room, as if the air itself had decided that corner was more important than the other corners." "That is a very elaborate observation," I said. "4 years in this court," she said pleasantly, "and you either develop the capacity for elaborate observation, or you develop a very good card game." I chose observation. She stopped walking and turned to face me. "I want to tell you something about her. Not as gossip, I find gossip inefficient and it rarely survives contact with the actual person. As context," she paused. "Before my time here, there was someone she loved. A woman which in this empire, in this court, was managed with the kind of quiet that does not announce itself but is understood. The Empress loved her and the woman chose, eventually, to leave. Not because the love was insufficient, because being loved by Empress Celine means being at the center of something enormous and demanding and consequential, and not everyone can sustain that. Not everyone wants to." She met my eyes. "After that, Celine decided to stop wanting things for herself. She runs this empire with a dedication that I think has always been genuine, but which has also, since then, been a very elegant method of not having to feel the absence of something else." She paused. "I have watched her for 4 years. I have watched her be the most present person in every room and the most privately absent person in it simultaneously. It is a very specific kind of loneliness that only looks like contentment from the outside." She began walking again. "I am telling you this because I watched her this morning at the briefing. And the particular quality of her attention in the room was different from every other morning I have observed it. It had a direction. You were in that direction." I said nothing. The garden path curved toward the east wall. "I am not advising you toward anything," Drew said. "I am simply providing context. What you do with it is entirely your own affair." She paused. "Though I will say, and this is the last I will say on the subject unprompted, that people who have decided to stop wanting things rarely actually stop. They simply stop acting on the wanting. And when someone comes along who makes the acting feel necessary rather than reckless, the accumulated weight of all that deferred wanting can be a rather astonishing thing to witness." She went back toward the palace, leaving me in the garden with that information and the cold end-of-season air and the particular quality of a thing heard at the right moment to make sense of everything you had already noticed. By the end of my first week, I had built a version of myself that was Marin Aldenmere, performing Vivienne Aldenmere, which meant I was always slightly to the left of the truth. I wore her name like a coat that nearly fit, close enough that no one looked at the shoulders where the seam was slightly wrong. Chamberlain Voss had been looking at me since the first morning briefing with an expression I decoded on the fourth day. He was categorizing me, and I was not fitting into any category he had prepared. He ran the morning briefings with the speed and pleasure of a man who has memorized everything and would like everyone to appreciate this. He was in his late 50s, gray and meticulous, and possessed of the specific intelligence that is simultaneously formidable and deeply uncomfortable with anything that falls outside established categories. On the fifth day, he handed me a correspondence routing assignment that was, I noticed, considerably more complex than what the other new ladies-in-waiting had received. Either he was testing whether the second Aldenmere daughter could handle the work, or he had decided she might as well be useful while he was still working out where she fit. Both interpretations were compatible with his expression, which revealed precisely nothing. Among the other ladies-in-waiting, Lady Cylindra Moores, who had been here 6 years and moved through every room with the economy of someone who had learned exactly where each door led. And Lady Hollymonde Breck, 17, freshly arrived, radiating the barely contained excitement of someone who had imagined this exact life since childhood and was finding the reality both precisely as described and entirely different in texture. She introduced herself on the first morning by grabbing my sleeve in the corridor and whispering, with considerable enthusiasm, "The Empress took your veil off. That never happens." She wanted to verify something about family papers, I said, which was the most plausible available explanation on no preparation. Hollymonde received this as a profound statement about imperial bureaucracy, decided it was interesting on those terms, and let it go. She was young enough that the world still made a certain kind of sense to her. I found it quietly charming and entirely enviable. Except, of course, for the Empress. She moved through the court like significant weather present and consequential and not quite reachable. She appeared at formal briefings as a silent observer. She attended evening events with the quality of being the most important element in any room, while conveying that the room's importance was entirely its own affair. She had a habit I identified on the third day, looking up from whatever she was doing at the exact moment I had successfully convinced myself I was watching without being noticed. She never reacted when she caught me. She simply looked back, let the moment become a question, and returned to what she had been doing. I told myself I was not becoming preoccupied with an empress. I was practicing the appropriate level of professional awareness of the most significant person in any room. I repeated this with decreasing conviction. On the 9th day, she sent for me. The private study was in the northern tower, 2nd floor, and it was nothing like the throne room. Human scale, a desk covered in organized correspondence, 2 chairs near the window at the angle of people who actually use furniture rather than furnish rooms for effect. 1 wall of books read, handled, reorganized by topic, with the occasional spine shelved upside down by someone who had replaced it while thinking about something else. 3 maps marked in blue ink. A fireplace doing actual work, warming the room rather than decorating it. The whole space smelled of wood smoke and old paper, and something faint like pine resin more personal than anything else in the palace had managed to be. She was at the window when I entered. She turned and waved off the beginning of a formal greeting. "Sit down," she said. She came to the other chair. 4 feet apart, at the same level, no dais and no ceremony between us. She had removed the circlet. Her hair was slightly less formally arranged. She was still unquestionably the Empress. The room understood this without being told, but she was also, marginally and surprisingly, a person. The throne room had made personhood difficult to perceive. "Tell me about the Aldenmere library," she said. Of all the things I had prepared for, this was not one. But the library was entirely mine. "It's the best room in the house," I said. "My father says it's the only part with genuine historical value. My great-great-grandmother started it. She had opinions about what was worth preserving, which is a generous way of saying she was a collector who imposed her perspective on future generations. The military history sections were what my father expanded. The rest I added myself." I paused. "It smells like this room, actually. Old paper and wood smoke." Selene looked at me with the expression of someone noting a significant detail. "What do you read?" History, primarily. Military campaigns, political theory, some natural history. My sister reads literature. We've always had different tastes. Your sister's correspondence describes someone primarily interested in verse and narrative, Celine said, without emphasis. The air changed temperature. I made a decision in the space of the same breath. Vivienne and I have never been particularly alike. Same library, very different shelves. She let that sit. The fire made its small sounds. What does your sister think of the imperial court? I chose carefully. Vivienne has believed for years this is the most important place in the empire. She prepared extensively. She considers it the center of everything. And what do you think of it? Not Vivienne. You. The distinction was so deliberate I felt it like a hand pressing gently against something I had been holding shut. I looked at those winter sea eyes warm in ways the accounts had consistently failed to document, and felt the vertigo of standing at the edge of the truthful answer. I think it is very beautiful, I said slowly, and very carefully designed to remind everyone of their appropriate position within a predetermined hierarchy. I think it takes a specific kind of person to live here without losing track of who they actually are when no one is observing. I paused. I'm not yet certain whether I'm that kind of person. I've only been here 9 days. Something crossed her expression, not quite a smile, but the territorial neighbor of one. You may go, she said, and then, as I reached the door. The library maintains an extensive collection of military history. Chamberlain Voss will issue your access. If you find anything worth discussing, I would welcome your thoughts. I had my hand on the frame when she said it. Marin. I stopped. My name. My actual name. Not the one I had been answering to for 9 days. Said in this room by this woman with the quiet certainty of someone who has known it all along and has simply been deciding when to say it. Not as accusation, as if it were something she had been holding and chose now to return to me. I turned. She was looking at me from the chair with her hands still, her expression carefully neutral in the way that careful neutrality functions when it is being deliberately deployed. The library opens at the 7th hour, she said. I left. I pressed one hand against the cold stone of the corridor and breathed. She knew. She had known since the throne room, or before it. She had interviewed me and given me every opportunity to tell the truth, and when I had not, she had said my name anyway, not as exposure, as if my name were simply a fact she had decided was worth acknowledging. The palace library occupied 2 floors of the southern wing, with windows placed to maximize light at every hour of the day. On the 3rd day of my access, the Empress arrived without announcement the way she entered all spaces she considered her own. She selected a book without looking at me and sat in the chair on the far side of the room. She sat, she read, I read. We occupied the same room for 37 minutes without acknowledging it. Then she said, without looking up, the Veldane campaign's approach to the eastern frontier. Your assessment. Effective short term, I said. The commander prioritized speed, but the supply line was unworkable in winter, and he knew it. He bet on urgency instead of sustainability. Structural problems don't wait for you to outrun them. She turned a page. The current Eastern situation has a structurally similar problem. Supply or urgency? She looked up. Something moved through her expression, genuine surprise before it became something more composed. Both, they compound each other. Then the correct response is patience rather than force. Which is harder to argue in briefings because it doesn't produce visible evidence of action. Much harder, she agreed. The 4th library visit, she chose the chair beside mine 5 feet instead of across the room. She read for 20 minutes and then said, without preamble, tell me something that doesn't appear in any document I'd have access to. My mother believed, I said, that the most powerful thing a person can do is make someone feel genuinely seen. Specifically, in order to make them feel grateful. It took me years to understand the difference between being truly seen by someone and being used as an audience for their perception of you. Celine set her book down. That distinction matters. Yes. Most people never notice it. They spend their lives grateful for attention, without questioning whether the attention is actually about them. "You don't do that," I said, before I had finished deciding to. "What?" "Perform attention. When you listen, you are actually listening. It is—" I stopped. "It is what?" There was something new in her voice, a quality that had always been present beneath the control, but was now more audible. "Like a note in a piece of music you have been hearing all along without quite registering." "Disorienting," I said, "in the best possible way. It makes pretense feel both pointless and wasteful, because you can feel that it would be noticed, and that you would be losing something by resorting to it." The fire made a sound. The afternoon light caught the edge of her hair and briefly turned it warm. She was looking at me, not at the fireplace anymore. Directly at me, with an expression that had moved past neutrality into something accumulating weight. One hand, resting on the arm of the chair, made a small movement, and then considered against completing it. "I should go," I said. My voice came out steady, which was a small miracle. She picked up her book. "The Veldane Archive has a second volume. Southeast corner, lower shelf, unmarked spine, blue page edges. I will leave it on the table for you tomorrow." I walked to the door. At the frame, I stopped. "You're nothing like your letters suggested." I turned. She was reading. Her hands were very still. "No," I said. "I'm not." I went back to my rooms and sat at the window watching the autumn garden in the failing light, and understood, with the clarity that arrives slowly and then all at once, that I was falling in love with an empress. Not the concept of her. The person in the chair who left volumes on tables, asked what I actually thought, and had one hand that had almost moved and then reconsidered. That was, by any reasonable measure, either the worst development of my 23 years or the best. And I had long since lost the ability to tell the difference. A diplomatic reception 3 days later required the full court. I dressed in dark green, not Vivienne's color, absolutely mine, and moved through the grand hall with the careful navigation of someone working from an approximate map. The Empress arrived 40 minutes in and moved through the gathering with the quality she had of making her own path. Her orientation in the room, the angle of her stillness amid the motion around her, had a direction, and it was aimed across the hall at me. Not obviously. But twice, her gaze crossed the room with the precision of something landing and departing before the branch has registered the weight. Lady Drew appeared at my elbow with wine she extended without ceremony. "She has been doing that since before you arrived," she said pleasantly. I believe she was watching the door. In 4 years, I have not seen her track someone across a reception. For your information, I was left standing in a small gap in the room's architecture that was visible from where the Empress stood. Lady Calamere. She was there. She stood close enough for conversation, far enough for propriety, the exact correct distance, and somehow, simultaneously, not enough. "Supply lines," I said. "The Eastern approach keeps occurring to me." The corner of her mouth made a movement that was not quite a smile, but was the space where a smile might someday live. "You think about military history at diplomatic receptions. I find it easier to be present in a room when I am thinking about something. That," she said quietly, "is the most precise description of a coping mechanism I have been employing for 12 years without finding words for it." Her voice had shifted from the social register into something closer to the library voice. Quieter, more itself. "I am aware," she said very quietly, "that there is a complication in the present situation that has not yet been formally addressed." "Yes," I said. "I intend to address it, when the moment is appropriate, which is not tonight." She looked at the painting on the far wall. "Tonight I am having a conversation with a woman who thinks about military campaigns at diplomatic receptions and finds me interesting for reasons I haven't yet finished understanding." "You find me interesting for reasons you haven't finished understanding either," I said. "That seems to be mutual." "It does," she agreed. She moved to the next conversation. But as she turned, her hand at her side brushed mine, the side of her fingers against the side of mine, less than a breath's duration. The kind of contact that can happen by accident in a crowded room, except the radius around us had not been crowded. And it lasted 1 second longer than accident would account for, and she did not look back. I stood with the memory of her fingers against mine and thought, I am a woman with a borrowed name, falling irrevocably in love with the ruler of an empire. Cress helped me out of the green gown that night and said, "You seem different, lighter. Like something that was being carried has been set down and you've only just noticed that your hands are free." "Something has started," I said. "I don't fully know its shape yet, but it has started." "Is it a good something?" I thought about gray eyes that were not cold in the ways the accounts promised. My name said once in a private study, as if it were something she had been holding and chose to return. The side of a hand against mine, 1 second longer than accident. "Yes," I said. "I think it might be the best something." The morning after the reception arrived with frost. A thin white film across the stone garden paths, across the last surviving roses, across everything that had not thought to protect itself. Cress brought breakfast and a note on imperial stationery. Not Lady Vivienne Aldenmere. Lady Aldenmere. The private study at the 3rd hour had harder light than at the 4th. The Empress was already seated, a document on her knee that she set aside when I entered. "Sit down," she said. Then, without preamble, "I know your name is Marin. I know Vivienne Aldenmere left before dawn, and that her maid substituted the available daughter. I know this because your sister's correspondence describes someone who attends, plays, and reads verse collections, while the Aldenmere family records list the second daughter as the one who reads military history and has not left the estate for any social occasion in 4 years. She paused. "I knew before you arrived." Silence. The fire made its small, unimpressed sounds. "Why didn't you send me back?" I asked. "Because," she said, "I have been receiving performances in this throne room for 12 years. Perfectly rehearsed, thoroughly prepared performances, and at the end of every audience I know precisely nothing more about the person than when they entered." Her gaze moved briefly to the window. "You came in wearing someone else's name, and were terrified and did not try to hide the terror. When I pressed you, you pushed back not with hostility, with something that resembled actual thought. I wanted to know what came next. I had not wanted to know what came next in a very long time. And now?" I asked. "Now I do something practical. A letter goes to your father today, explaining a minor administrative confusion in the appointment process. The court record will reflect that Marin Aldenmere holds the position, not Vivienne. Your father's title is safe, the family's standing is safe. As far as the official history is concerned, the right daughter came to court on the appointed day. She held my gaze. There will be no record of a deception, no consequence for your family. That is a considerable use of imperial authority on behalf of a minor noble family," I said carefully. "It is," she agreed, and said nothing further on the subject of why, which was itself a statement. "One condition," she said. "You stay. As yourself. Not as a performance of your sister, not as a version of Marin Aldenmere adjusted for palatability. As the person who told me that my mother used people's need to feel seen as a mechanism for their gratitude." A pause. "I find I have very little interest in the polished version. I am very interested in the actual one." I thought about taking a veil in a dark corridor, because survival had seemed more important than truth, and how somewhere between that corridor and this chair, the calculation had reversed entirely. "I can do that," I said. Something in her face moved the permission a face grants itself before the expression is committed to. "Good," she said, already returning to the document. And then without looking up, "The library. 7th hour." I left the second Veldane volume on the table. For the first time since arriving at this palace, I walked back through a corridor and felt something that was not the low-grade terror of a person maintaining a fiction under pressure. What I felt instead was the specific and unfamiliar sensation of being exactly who I was in exactly the right place, with someone who knew it, who had chosen to let me stay anyway. The relationship deepened in the patient accumulation of real conversation. Library mornings, study afternoons, evenings that began as dinners and extended into discussions that ran until the candles burned low. She told me about her first year as Empress at 2217 separate crises arriving before the previous one resolved, managed alone because there was no one else to manage them with. I told her about the library at home and the particular loneliness of the daughter who stayed behind. Did you grow out of it? I asked once. The aloneness. She was quiet for long enough that the question took on different dimensions. I grew better at it, she said finally. There is a version of aloneness that is functional, that you can maintain without it becoming a wound. A pause. I was very good at that version for a long time. Was? I said. She did not answer. But she did not move away from it either, which was its own kind of answer. There was an afternoon in the second month when she showed me the maps on her study wall. Not the formal cartographic documents that were part of the public imperial record, but the working maps, the ones marked in blue ink, at the points where she had made decisions or planned responses or tracked the consequences of both. She stood beside me at the wall and explained 3 of the markings, and then she stopped explaining and simply stood there, and after a moment she said, very quietly, without looking at me, most people who stand in this room see authority. The records. The evidence of governance. A pause. You are the first person in several years who has looked at the markings and seen the decisions behind them, the cost of them. She paused again. That is either very perceptive or I am becoming transparent and I cannot decide which possibility I find more alarming. Perhaps both, I said. She looked at me sideways, and the not-quite smile arrived. Perhaps, she agreed. We had, by the 6th week, developed the kind of shorthand that is its own form of intimacy, not coded language exactly, but the compression that happens between 2 people who have had enough real conversations that the connective tissue between ideas no longer needs to be spelled out. She would say one word about the Eastern Territories and I already knew which concern she was referencing. I would mention the Veldane supply line and she would know I meant something about patience and structural problems, and not the historical campaign at all. It was the vocabulary of 2 people who had been paying attention to the same things from different angles and discovered, in the comparison, that their maps of the world were remarkably compatible. Drew observed this with the satisfied expression of someone watching a theory prove itself out. Hollimond observed it with delight and the occasional dramatic sigh. Chamberlain Voss observed it and filed it in whatever impeccable internal system he maintained for anomalies, and appeared to reach the conclusion that it was not going to resolve into a category he recognized and would therefore simply have to be its own category. November brought complications in the form of Lord Aldrich Penmore, a visiting dignitary from the Eastern Territories, with the energy of someone who had received importance recently enough that he still found it exciting. He found me in the outer corridor and said, pleasantly, in the tone of someone who believes they are being diplomatic, Lady Aldenmere, in 6 weeks you've had more private audiences with the Empress than most ladies-in-waiting receive in a year. Quite the accomplishment for someone from a family of such modest standing. I set down the correspondence schedule I had been reviewing. Lord Penmore, I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but you are a visiting guest and I am a permanent member of this court. My relationship with every person in this palace is considerably less your business than you appear to believe. I held his gaze for the beats required. He moved on. For 3 days after, Celine did not come to the library. The first morning I told myself she had obligations. By the 3rd I understood. She was retreating. Not completely, but pulling back to a safer distance. Returning to the version of proximity that carried no risk. I felt it the way you feel a window closing in a room you have been breathing in. Lady Drew appeared on the 3rd afternoon. She heard about Penmore, she said. She didn't reprimand him. If she were simply angry, she would have. Instead, she is becoming very efficient, very present for everyone except the person she most wants to be present for. She met my eyes. She is not running. She is hesitating. Hesitating is a person standing at the edge of a decision, unable to make it without help. She paused. Go to the library tonight. Late. She goes there when she cannot sleep. Be there. Let her find you. The library at night was different from the library in daylight, older, quieter, lit by lamps that made warm circles against the dark. I sat in my chair with a book and let the palace grow quiet around me, and felt not anxiety but something more like clarity. Like having walked a very long way and arrived at the place I was always going, and the arriving being its own resolution. The door opened at the 11th hour. I didn't look up immediately. I waited until she had crossed to the nearest shelf and stopped, and the silence had become the kind with a person in it, and then I looked. She was looking at me, not at the shelf, not with the managed expression she wore in every public space. Just the woman underneath the Empress. She came to the chair beside mine, not across the room, the one that had become hers by weeks of use, and sat. She did not produce a book. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't," I said. "I do." She looked at her hands, which were resting in her lap with the stillness that I had learned to read as the external expression of something happening underneath that was not still at all. When Penmore said something pointed in that corridor, instead of recognizing that a visiting dignitary's opinion was entirely irrelevant to anything that matters, I retreated. I told myself it was strategic. I was lying to myself. A pause. After the last time, after someone I loved chose to leave rather than stay, I made a decision. I decided that wanting things deeply was a vulnerability I could not afford. The Empire needed me functional, and functioning meant not being in a position where someone could leave and take with them something I could not recover from losing. She paused again. I was very good at this for a long time. I arranged my life around efficiency, around work, around being present for everyone else's needs and entirely unavailable for my own. And I told myself that this was not loss, that it was simply the cost of the work. That some people are built for the kind of love that takes up space in a life, and some people are built for something else, and I was built for the Empire, and that was enough. She looked up then. "And then you came into my throne room wearing your sister's veil, and I looked at you and I thought, here is someone I recognize, someone who has learned to want quietly, someone who has been making themselves small for so long, they have almost forgotten how to want at all. Someone doing exactly what I haven't been doing from the other direction, for a completely different set of reasons." The lamp made its small sounds. The frost lay across the stones outside. Somewhere in the palace, something structural settled, the way old buildings do when the cold reaches them. "I kept you," she said, "because you were the first person in 12 years who made staying feel like something other than duty." The room was entirely still. I stood. I crossed the 3 feet between our chairs and stood before her, and she looked up at me with an expression that contained everything she had said and everything she hadn't, all of it visible, none of it managed, all of it undefended in the particular way that only happens when a person has decided that the cost of being defended is now greater than the cost of being seen. I held out my hand. She looked at it for one deliberate breath, long enough to make the choosing matter, and took it, and stood. We stood in the lamplight of the library at the 11th hour, and I said the thing that had been true since the throne room. I am not going anywhere. I came here in a borrowed name, and you gave me back my own, and I intend to be here as myself for as long as you will have me. I held her gaze. The calculation changed the morning I took the veil. I just did not know yet what I was actually choosing. She looked at me for a long moment. And then the movement at the corner of her mouth that had been managed and almost permitted and retreated from for weeks arrived, completed, and became what it had always been going to be: small, unmistakable, entirely real. "You are," she said, with something in her voice that could only be described as warmth, not performed warmth. Not the appropriate temperature of professional consideration, but the actual thing. The kind that comes from somewhere real, a very unexpected person, Marin Aldenmere. "So are you," I said. She brought one hand to the side of my face and kissed me the way the Veldane campaign should have been managed, with patience, with the full understanding of what was being built and what it required to sustain, and with no intention of retreating. When we separated, we were still in the lamplight, still holding hands, and outside the windows the frost had made the dark garden silver. I could feel the smile on my face before I fully registered that it was mine. And I thought, this is it. Not the palace, not the library, not the empire, not the title or the role or the name I had borrowed and then been given back. This specific person, this exact smile. This was what I had walked toward without knowing I was walking toward anything. I had walked in as someone else and found my way home as myself. The winter gathering was the largest formal event of the cold month's 2 days, visiting nobility from 4 territories. Elaborate social choreography requiring everyone to know their position and perform it without visible effort. On the first evening, I was positioned near the east wall with the other ladies in waiting. Celine moved through the room on the traditional greeting circuit. She completed the first half with the precision the occasion required. Then she deviated. She came to where I was standing. She stopped beside me and said, for the visiting lord accompanying her, Lord Karsten, may I introduce Lady Maren Aldenmere. She joined our court recently and has developed, in 6 weeks, a more sophisticated grasp of the eastern frontier trade situation than most of my advisors have managed in years. What registered in the room was not the introduction itself, it was the way she said it, not the professional half-distance of acknowledgement. With the closeness of someone who has decided that the person they are speaking about is theirs to speak about, that the relationship between them can be visible, that it requires no further management. The introduction lasted 40 seconds. She moved on. But 40 seconds told the court everything it needed to know, in the precise language that courts understand. Drew appeared at my elbow. She clinked her glass against mine without comment, looked at the room, and said simply, she moved like a person who had somewhere she would rather be. Vivienne returned in March. She came to my door, looked at me, then looked past me at the sitting room that had become mine, the books on the shelves, the correspondence on the desk, the particular arrangement of a room lived in honestly. You're different? She said. Yes, I said. Good different, she said, with the instinct she had always had for the true thing. Are you happy? I thought about the library and the frost-white garden and the person who had given me back my name and then built something new around it. About being chosen not as a performance or a function or a second-best replacement, but as the actual person. Yes, I said. Thoroughly. She smiled, her best smile. Then I suppose you should introduce me to the Empress, since technically I have an outstanding court appointment that was never properly cancelled. Technically, I agreed. You do. When she left 2 weeks later, she embraced me in the corridor and said into my shoulder, she looks at you like you're the only thing in the room she decided to see on purpose. Yes, I said, she does. Good, Vivienne said. You deserve that. You have always deserved that. And so, here is the full shape of it. A maid pressed a veil into my hands before dawn and I took it because survival seemed more urgent than truth. And because something in me had been waiting for exactly this kind of extraordinary problem, and because I had spent 23 years being the daughter who remained, and I was unreasonably tired of it. I walked into the most powerful room in the empire wearing someone else's name, and the most powerful woman in that room looked at me and knew immediately that I was lying. She kept me anyway, not because the deception was clever, though it held, not because she needed a second Aldenmere daughter. She kept me because something in the room recognized something in me, and she was tired of performances, and I was the first person in a long time who had brought her something real to read. She taught me, without meaning to teach me anything, that being fully known by someone is not the precursor to loss. That someone looking at all of you, the borrowed name and the true one, the borrowed veil and the face underneath, the 23 years of careful wanting and staying anyway, is not the exception to the rule of how love works. It is the rule. It has always been the rule. I had simply never been given the right evidence for it before. She learned that loving something deeply is not primarily a vulnerability. It is primarily a decision, a daily decision, made with full knowledge of what it costs and full conviction that the cost is exactly right. That you can choose someone with your whole self and not dissolve, that the empire still runs when the Empress allows herself to want something, that closing the window is not the same as surviving. I took a veil and walked into an empire because survival required it, and I found something worth staying for, and I stayed. My father visited in the late spring. He was very correct and very careful, and also, underneath both of those things, visibly pleased in a way that had nothing to do with the court appointment and everything to do with something he saw in my face when I met him at the gate. He sat in the study and had tea with the Empress, and spoke about military history and the long relationship between the Aldenmere family and the imperial crown. And Celine engaged with him with the particular warmth she deployed when she had decided someone was worth the actual version of herself, rather than the official one. On the way out, he said to me very quietly that he was glad it was me who had come. That the right daughter was the one who came. I think about that sometimes. The right daughter. I took the veil because it seemed like survival. And it was. Only the thing I was surviving toward turned out to be considerably more and considerably better than anything I had planned for in that corridor at dawn. The frost comes every November and retreats every March. The garden below the eastern wing goes bare and comes back with the patient confidence of things that know their own cycle. The library is there at the 7th hour, and the private study has 2 chairs near the window that belong, by now, to the specific people who fill them best. The court has adjusted to things, as courts do, without ceremony or proclamation, simply by absorbing a new reality and incorporating it into the established order of things. Hollimont considers the situation the most romantic thing she has encountered in her actual life, which she says approximately once a month, and is not wrong. Lady Drew wears her rings on the wrong fingers and finds everything satisfying, which is her natural condition. Chamberlain Voss has filed the new arrangement in whatever impeccable internal system he maintains and appears, on the whole, to have concluded that it is administratively settled, which from Voss is essentially a blessing. What I know now that I did not know in that corridor is this. Wanting things for yourself is not the opposite of doing the right thing. It is sometimes the same thing. The woman who took the veil was trying to save her family, yes, but she was also, underneath that, refusing to spend one more year as the daughter who remained while her life happened to someone else. Both of those things were true simultaneously. Both of them were necessary. Both of them led here. Some things begin as necessity and become something else entirely. Some doors you walk through in a borrowed name and find on the other side, yourself the actual one, the full one, the one who has been waiting in the library, while the other version attended the seasonal courts and wrote letters home about rooms she had never entered. Some veils are lifted by someone who decided, before they touched the silk, that whatever was underneath was worth finding. Who decided the real thing was more interesting than the prepared one? Who decided, in the space of a throne room and a veil and 30 feet of white stone, to keep the unexpected true thing rather than send it away for the performance? I was Marin Aldenmere, second daughter, reader of military history. Woman who walked into an empire wearing a borrowed name and found her own. She kept me. And every morning, at the 7th hour, I walk into the library, and my chair is by the northeast window, and her chair is beside mine, and the books are where they were left the day before, and the empire is exactly as we left it, still running, still necessary, still requiring everything we have to give it. And between one briefing and the next, between the morning and the afternoon and the evening and the night, there is this, the specific, ordinary, extraordinary miracle of 2 people who chose each other with their eyes open, who know all the costs and have decided the costs are exactly right, who sit in a library at the 7th hour and read, and occasionally argue about the eastern frontier, and look up at precisely the right moment to find the other one already looking. That is all it is. That is all it needs to be. That is, as it turns out, everything.